Alright, let's jump right in. Have you ever looked at the massive administrative machinery of India and thought, wait, is our constitution just a massive colonial hangover? It's a huge debate, right? It's been raging since the Constituent Assembly days, and honestly, it's absolutely central for your UPSC prep. So we're going to break down this whole complex debate step by step and separate the facts from the fiction.
So in this explainer, we're doing a deep, critical analysis of the British legacy that's embedded right into our Constitution. And to make sure you get the absolute maximum value for your mains answer writing, we've structured this whole thing using the classic thesis, antithesis, synthesis approach. It's a game changer because it helps you not just memorize facts, but present that perfectly balanced critical evaluation examiners love.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to trace the British legacy, look at the Westminster model, and touch on the judiciary and rule of law. After that, we'll analyze the major constitutional critiques, contrast it all with the 1935 Act, and finally, wrap it up with a sovereign democratic synthesis. Sound good? Let's get to it.
Starting off with Section 1, tracing the British legacy. This is going to be our thesis.
Look, to critically evaluate the Constitution, we absolutely have to acknowledge the undeniable administrative foundation laid down by the British. If you look at the historical evolution here, British oversight really kicked off formally with the Regulating Act of 1773. And then, over decades, through all those Charter Acts and Indian Councils Acts, you see this slow, creeping introduction of representation and expanded governance. It was a gradual buildup that culminated in the Government of India Act of 1935. And let's be real, that 1935 Act ended up being a massive, massive blueprint for our constitutional framers.
So, what exactly did we inherit? Grab your pens because you definitely want to note these down. These are the undeniable structural features we lifted straight from the British playbook. We're talking the parliamentary form of government, the cabinet system, and bicameralism. We also grabbed the concept of single citizenship, the power to issue prerogative writs to protect rights, and, of course, the administrative office of the governor. Basically, the skeleton of our new republic.
Now, let's zoom in on the absolute cornerstone of this inheritance, the Westminster model. In simple terms, this is a parliamentary system where the executive is collectively responsible to the legislature, and it leans heavily on a cabinet system. Our founding fathers, guys like K.M. Munshi, they basically argued, hey, we've already been operating under a version of this during British rule, right? So they chose familiarity over trying out some brand new American-style presidential system. And remember, dropping a precise academic definition like this really elevates the intro of your mains answers.
Okay, another really profound inheritance is the rule of law. This is the doctrine famously laid out by the British jurist A.V. Dicey, and it essentially means the complete absence of arbitrary power. It means everyone, rich, poor, official, non-official, is totally equal under the ordinary law of the land. It's a crucial mechanism for equality, and as you know, it's deeply, deeply embedded right into Article 14 of our Constitution.
Which brings us to the judiciary. Now, unlike the United States, which has this double system of courts where federal courts handle federal laws and state courts handle state laws, India went with an integrated judiciary. We pulled this heavily from the 1935 Act. It means we have a single, unified hierarchy, Supreme Court at the top, enforcing both central and state laws. Highlighting this comparative depth is exactly how you show the examiner you really get federal dynamics.
All right, moving on to Section 2. Let's analyze the constitutional critiques. This is our antithesis.
To really appreciate the Constitution, we got to talk about the fierce pushback it got, both during drafting and after. One of the most famous critiques? That it's a quote-unquote lawyer's paradise. Sir Ivor Jennings and Constituent Assembly member H.K. Maheshwari argue the document was just way too legalistic, bulky and complicated. Basically a great job creation scheme for lawyers, but a nightmare for the common man. But, and this is a big but, while critics saw a flaw, you have to realize that for a massive, newly independent, incredibly diverse nation, that meticulous legal precision was kind of necessary, right? The framers had to avoid dangerous misinterpretations. They needed an unambiguous path forward.
Then you hit the ideological critiques. Some Constituent Assembly members, like Lokanath Misra, came out swinging. They called the document a bag of borrowings and a slavish imitation of the West. They really felt it lacked originality. They argued it completely missed the true traditional spirit of India, like, not building the whole foundation strictly on Gandhian village panchayats.
But that brings us to the absolute most infamous critique of them all. Is the Constitution just a carbon copy of the 1935 Act? Critics like N. Srinivasan literally said it was a close copy in both language and substance. So this is the million-dollar question for your analysis. Is our Constitution just a colonial relic with a shiny new cover page?
Let's find out in Section 3, the 1935 Act contrast. Time for our synthesis.
Here's where you build that balanced, critical evaluation the examiners are hunting for. We have to contrast the undeniable similarities with the actual revolutionary democratic leaps the framers took. And we anchor this whole defense with a brilliant quote from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. He was totally unapologetic, saying, "There is nothing to be ashamed of in borrowing, but listen to his crucial distinction here." He pointed out that what was borrowed from the 1935 Act were mostly just the details of administration. So they kept the administrative skeleton, sure, but the philosophical soul of the document, that was entirely new.
Let's actually build out a comparative analysis, because this is pure gold for the exam hall. On one side, you have the 1935 Act. It was an imposed colonial law, zero guarantee of fundamental rights, and representation was so limited that only about 10% of people could even vote based on property and tax rules. Now contrast that with the Indian Constitution, forged by a sovereign assembly, guaranteeing justiciable fundamental rights to everyone, and introducing the absolute game-changer of universal adult franchise.
So yes, the administrative skeleton, stuff like the federal scheme, emergency powers, the governor's role, might look exactly like the 1935 Act. But the true soul lives in these profound democratic leaps. A sovereign constituent assembly that actually represented the people. Universal adult franchise giving a voice to literally every citizen, no matter their status. Justiciable fundamental rights protecting your individual liberties. And a fiercely independent judiciary to back it all up. Guys, these are profoundly anti-colonial provisions.
And honestly, this just reveals the sheer pragmatism of our founding fathers. They deliberately chose administrative continuity. They kept proven structures to prevent total administrative chaos in a newly partitioned, fragile, incredibly diverse nation. But they fused it with a sovereign democratic synthesis. They didn't just blindly copy-paste, they adopted the best practices from around the globe that fit India's unique needs, and they deliberately avoided the toxic faults of the past colonial systems.
Which brings us to our concluding synthesis, and I highly encourage you to memorize this exact framing for your essays. The Indian Constitution is not a colonial relic. It is a transformative synthesis that repurposed British administrative machinery to serve a sovereign, democratic republic. It is basically a masterful blend of historical continuity and revolutionary democratic change.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a provocative thought as you get back to your prep. If our administrative structure, things like the bureaucracy, the police frameworks, if they are undeniably a colonial inheritance, is our modern governance still burdened by a colonial mindset? Does the system still sometimes act like a ruler instead of a public servant? Think deeply about how that historical legacy impacts the contemporary challenges we see today. Keep studying, keep analyzing, and I'll see you in the next explainer.